Ethical oil or conflict oil? Which side are you on? Tonight on The Source. Oh, we're getting down to the final strokes. The United States State Department is about to make a decision on the Keystone XL pipeline. You know the one, we've been talking about it for weeks now. Right now there's a pipeline called Keystone, and it brings oil from the oil sands down to the United States. Well, there would be an expansion of this called Keystone XL that would bring oil sands oil all the way down to Texas. Now, why would you sell oil to Texas? They make it there too. Well, the answer is there's a lot of refineries down there, and right now those refineries are importing oil from some of the nastiest places in the world, like, for example, Venezuela. It's conflict oil, to use a phrase, compared to Canadian ethical oil. And that's something else we've been talking about on this show, because the choice is not, as our friends in the Greenpeace would have us choose, between oil sands oil versus some fantasy fuel of the future that's perfect in every way, no environmental side effects, no impact whatsoever. The only problem with it, it just doesn't exist. You cannot have a morally serious debate of oil sands oil versus some fantasy oil. That is not being morally serious. Ethics in practice means choosing between two real-life decisions. And dilithium crystals, or what they called it in the movie Unobtainium, in the movie Avatar, Unobtainium, that's not a real-life choice. And so when Greenpeace swarmed, all 200 of them, swarmed on Parliament Hill a week or so ago, what they were doing by opposing the Keystone XL pipeline and the oil sands that will flow through it is not opposing oil at all. Because if oil to the United States is not shipped from Canada, it will indeed get there from somewhere else. We know this because before the oil sands came on stream in a big way in the last 10 years, Saudi Arabia was the #1 source of U.S. oil imports. We Canadians have displaced the Saudis as the #1 source. But if, God forbid, the oil sands were to be shut down, it's not as if Americans would suddenly stop driving their cars and stop heating their homes. No, they would simply source their oil from Saudi Arabia and other conflict regimes. No one would be happier in the world with the oil sands being shut down than the ambassador from Saudi Arabia to Washington, D.C. He would be there with his super tankers brimming with Saudi Sharia oil, Saudi conflict oil, Saudi terrorist sponsoring, women beating oil, a regime that is so hideous it treats its own people sometimes worse than it treats animals. And I can tell you, if a country doesn't treat its people well, it surely doesn't care about the environment. And that, my friends, is the grown-up choice. And I put it to you that those Greenpeace protesters, not the professional protesters who are on Parliament Hill, but if there were any well-meaning ordinary Canadians, and that's an interesting point because most of the anti-oil sands extremists are actually working for foreign multinationals like Greenpeace or the Saudi embassy. The legitimate Canadian progressive opponents of the oil sands haven't thought it through. Because if they look at their own ethical values, their belief in environmental responsibility, in peace, in the treatment of workers, and in human rights, I think they would, perhaps grudgingly, come to the same conclusion I have, which is, despite its flaws, oil sands oil from Canada is the most ethical oil in the world. It's sometimes hard to realize that, but the problem with oil is, I don't know what God was thinking when he was handing out this stuff, but he gave it to all the world's bastards: Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, Nigeria, Sudan, conflict countries, dictatorships, terrorist-supporting countries, even rogue states. And so if you take the 4 liberal criteria that I've mentioned, environmental responsibility, peace, treatment of workers, and human rights, take those 4 liberal values, those 4 values that Greenpeace itself used to believe in, and compare Canada's oil sands oils to every other oil-producing country in the world, you must come to the conclusion I have. The Canadian oil sands oil is the fair trade coffee of the world's oil industry. I said it. In fact, you must, if you believe in making the world a better place, if you believe in the environmentalist credo of thinking globally, act locally, then you must come to the conclusion I have, that we must, in fact, follow our morality and produce as much oil sands oil as possible, knowing that every extra barrel we produce and sell to our American friends, or even if we export it to Asia, is one less barrel that will be sold by a Saudi prince, an Iranian terrorist supporter, a Nigerian kleptocrat, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Every barrel of oil that we sell is one barrel less that the bad guys sell. That's $100 going to us for schools and hospitals and to support our freedom fighters in Afghanistan. $100 less that goes to the people causing the conflict of the world. Today we're going to have an interesting show. We talk about a lot of things on the show. We're going to talk about freedom of speech, but we're going to talk to two interesting voices on the oil sands, two voices we haven't heard a lot from. We're going to talk to Ambassador David Wilkins, former ambassador from the United States to Ottawa, who isn't part of the oil patch and he's not a radical environmental extremist. He's looking at things from a diplomatic point of view, from a U.S. interest point of view, to talk about how that country will be more geopolitically stable, more diplomatically independent, if it can cut the strings between it and the OPEC countries. And we'll also talk to an Aboriginal senator, Senator Patrick Brazeau. You know, Greenpeace likes to trot out Aboriginal people saying we are working in the interests of Aboriginal Canadians. They say that, but is it really true? I don't know if it is. I don't think so. My friends, we've got a lot to talk about ethical oil versus conflict oil. I know which side I'm on. I hope you'll be convinced after today's show, too.